You're listening to the Modern People Leader podcast, where we go behind the scenes with today's top HR leaders and work experts. We talk to them about how they've gotten to where they're at, what they do every day, and what they see coming next for the future of work. Hope you enjoy. Before we get to the episode, we wanted to ask for your help with something. We want to hear the craziest request that you've ever had to support in your HR career. Think the odd request or two that you've received from your CEO, or something that probably involved some insane spreadsheet or a hacky workaround. We want to hear them all. We're teaming up with ChartHop on something big here in the next couple of months. And right now, we are just trying to collect as many crazy stories as we can. Again, think tight deadlines and possible to track data, or anything that probably just made you roll your eyes when you initially received the request. We think this will be a really fun way to shine a light on the real and sometimes really messy side of HR. We're going to feature some of these stories on the podcast and some of the other channels. And the first 20 people that submit stories will get a Starbucks gift card, courtesy of the ChartHop team. So I'm going to drop a link to submit your stories in the show notes. I think this is going to be a lot of fun, and I can't wait to see what y'all submit. All right, now back to the episode. Lucia, welcome to the show.
Thanks.
How's your week going?
Me. My week is going reasonably well. Yeah.
That's good to hear. I appreciate the energy you're bringing so far from our little pre-recording chat we just had. I'm like feeling a little bit run down with the allergies, and you already had some jokes going, calling Steven Stefan. I'm calling you the wrong name, and so I appreciate the energy already. But so good to have you. And if you've listened to the show, then you're probably familiar with where we're going to go next, and that's good news stories. And so good news stories is the way we kick off every episode. We all go around and share a personal or work-related story from the past week or two, and it's just like a fun way to kick things off. And we like for our guests to go first. So if you have something, please go.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think I'm probably a super positive person because I have a 4-year-old who's always giving me diseases, and I feel like every day that I survive is one to celebrate. What I've been doing recently, though, I've been getting really into giving. So, like, I'm part of this group Buy Nothing. I don't know if you guys have heard of it. And you give things to the community, and the community can give you things back. So this week, I've given a baby scale, a slumber pod, a scooter, and like a number of other things just from my home to people who live in the community. And I got back 2 giant plants. And so I'm really excited. I got a 6-foot tall fiddle leaf fig tree that I'm trying to nurse back to health. And I got a corn plant. I didn't know you could do this. There's like plants, indoor plants that look like they grow corn, but they don't. So I got those 2 things. Wait, Steven's trying to say something. Stefan!
Stefan, what are you doing?
I'm trying to ask a question, and I know I'm not supposed to do this during Good News Stories, but like, what is this again? What is this service? Because I have a shed full of old kid things. My 2 daughters are teenagers, and I love plants. And so the notion that I can donate things that aren't being used and get plants is amazing. So what is this?
Yeah, it's a community group. And so they have them across many different types of social media. Nextdoor has one. It's called Buy Nothing. And you just post the things that you have. And you're like, hey, I've got a stroller. Does anybody want it? And then people can respond and say whether they want that thing or not. And they can come to your house and get it.
Ooh.
And then the same thing is happening on the receiving end. It's like someone was like, I have this giant fiddle leaf fig tree. And I was like, yes, please. I need more plants in my home. And I went over to his house and I got it. And it's nice because you meet your neighbors and you get to help people with stuff that they need and want too.
Love it. All gonna. That is great news. Get rid of things you're not using and get amazing things for your home. My good news is it is my youngest daughter's 13th birthday. So I officially have 2 teenagers in the house. Super thrilled by that. Cora, I love you. Happy birthday. You're amazing. So that's all I got.
Very cool. Happy birthday.
Yeah, happy birthday. Oh my God, what is my good news? So this will be, I mean, this is kind of like a boring good news story, but the last couple of weeks have been chaos. Last week, Steven and I were in New York for the full week. The prior weekend, I was in Oaxaca for a wedding, and this is the first full weekend that I'll just be hanging out. And my in-laws are in town. We're gonna go to a restaurant here in Austin called Fig tonight. So get some Italian food, and I mean that's the only good news I can think of at the moment. But I feel like I'm missing something. And then on the work front, I feel like me and Steven have had a really good groove, like a good like rhythm the last month and a half since we came back to work from the holidays. And it feels like we're firing on all cylinders. We probably talked about this on the show before, but we now do daily stand ups. We have a weekly like sales sync. We have Trello boards for different projects that we're working on. It just feels like we're growing up as a business, and it feels good. Like sometimes I have like proud moments like, oh wow, like I can't believe us two have built all of this in the last 4 years. So that's my good news.
It's great news.
Very cool.
So
All right, y'all, we've got some big news, or maybe not big news. You may have heard about this already, but we are doing MPL Live in Boston on March 6th. We followed the data this time, and the data was telling us we needed to go to Boston, so we're going to Boston. It's a top 3 city for us follower-wise. We owe so much to the incredible HR leaders who have been with us from the start that happen to be from Boston. Shout out to the MPL legends like Katie Burke, Dina Upton, Jen Paxton, Adrian Barnard, Tracy Sponenberg. I mean, there are just so many. I feel like I'm leaving a bunch of folks out, but I think that just speaks to how deep the Boston People Leader bench really is. So here's what you can expect. We're going to do a speed networking session. So 60 minutes to meet as many people as possible. And if you can remember the most people superpowers from the people that you meet, it'll definitely come in handy for you, and you'll find out more on why at the event. And then the main event is the live podcast. So shout out to Katie Burke for these recommendations. But so far we have 2 amazing speakers lined up. We have Carmel Galvin, who's the Chief People Officer at Clavio, and we have Linda Aiello, who's the Chief People and Culture Officer at DraftKings. It's going to be a fun night. It'll be about 4 hours. And if you're in Boston and you're still listening to this ad, I think this is your sign to go grab your ticket. We'll put a link in the show notes. But we've already sold a good amount of tickets, and we're going to cap it at some point. So I'd highly recommend you go grab your ticket right now.
I'll keep us moving. The next question, it's what I call the Brene Brown question, Lucia. Tell us your story. What was your journey through HR, and how did that lead to you becoming the Chief People Officer at Virta Health?
Yeah. Well, my story starts off at birth. No, my story starts off, I would say, just like being a really awkward kid. So I've always been very awkward and very insecure. And I think that made me super passionate about psychology because I was like, oh no, find out why I'm not cool. I can read it in this book. And so I've been a student of psychology like since high school. And then in college, I thought I was going to be a clinical psychologist, but I ended up falling in love with organizations and started doing research on OB. I did a PhD at the GSB in organizational behavior, and there I was very interested in interventions. So things that you can change about someone's environment to produce some kind of change in their life. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to go applied. I'm going to work for this large organization, and I'm going to make all these changes in the organization through my research. So I went to Yahoo and I started off in people analytics. It was not like that. It was like, come with our numbers, please, ma'am, and stop trying to do all these interventions and like suggest all these changes. So, my stint in analytics was short because I was really wanting to make these changes. So I went from analytics to I did program management for a while with engagement. I was chief of the staff to the head of HR for a bit. And then I was also a business partner for the sales team. So in the time that I was at Yahoo, I kind of went to all the different parts of the people team. And that put me in a great position to look for jobs leading people teams at startups. And so after Yahoo, I went to Patreon and I was their head of people for a number of years. And then the next stop after that was Virta, where I am now, where I lead Virta's people team, which is kind of a cross-functional team that covers all the parts of the employee experience.
I was actually so we had a dinner in New York City last week, and one of the people that showed up is Angela Crossman, and she was sharing, some of, I think the question I asked her was like, what were you doing? Like, where were you working when you had your first child? And I think at the time she was at Yahoo, and she was also chief of staff for, I don't know if it was for HR, but did you cross paths with her at all?
I don't think I know this person,
Okay.
so maybe
I
not.
know Yahoo's huge, but I don't know.
It
It
is
feels like
pretty huge.
we get a lot of guests from like the same like 4 or 5 companies. Like
Yeah.
EA is a big one. Yahoo. I'm sure
Pepsi.
they're Pepsi.
It was
Yeah,
like 12,000 people when I was there. So
Wow.
yeah,
a lot of people for sure. And globally, too.
yeah,
So
yeah.
Mhm.
So one thing that stuck with me from the prep call was you mentioned that you've been doing a lot of inner work and how this has helped you as a leader. And hearing your background, it makes a lot of sense that this would be something that you'd have a lot of passion for. And I think you also mentioned that as an IC, it is possible to have this like really buttoned up, perfect version of yourself. And I've even experienced this. Like you feel like you have to like present this perfect version of Daniel for your boss or for your team. You feel like you have to be 100% on it for every meeting. You have to like just like nail everything. You can't make any mistakes. And I think you said your realization was that as a leader, people actually want the opposite of that. And they want like more of like the raw, authentic version. They want somebody that's relatable. They want somebody that is okay with admitting when they make a mistake or when they like totally screwed up or just like took you down the wrong path. And so I'm just curious, like, when did you initially have that realization and how has that been helpful for you as a leader?
Yeah, I would say I initially started to understand it at Yahoo, like towards the end of my time at Yahoo. And that was part of why I moved out of analytics and wanted to get into like business partnership, because that's where you're really talking to the business and trying to understand the individuals who are in charge of driving change and how to relate to them. And it solidified and became even more clear to me when I started managing people directly. So as opposed to being like a matrix manager who's like, I'm in charge of these projects, to being like, I'm in charge of this team of people and the team is growing, there it became clear that a lot of things became clear. One, that people don't really care how smart you are. Like that's not the wavelength that we're working at here in organizations. I think that that's something that's so critical in academia, and it may even be critical in analytics, but in the broader world of business, there are tons of smart people and nobody really cares about that. There are also tons of people who are not so smart, but who are still able to drive change. And those people are going to be more effective and more likely to move forward. And so that realization became clear to me as I progressed as a manager. And I would say, too, my own sense of insecurity became more clear. So, like when I told you guys the story about why I started in psychology, like I didn't know that at the time, that that's why I was so into psychology, was that I wanted to feel like I could fit in. Like that's something that I came to realize after years of doing work with therapists and coaches to try and understand why I was so into this space. And, I think a lot of people who go into leadership are trying to fill some kind of gap or empty space within themselves. Like, I want people to like me. I want to feel accomplished. I'm going into leadership to get those gaps filled. And then they become leaders and they're still looking to fill that gap. And the void just grows and it becomes a harder and harder thing because they're not able to connect with the folks who are supposed to be leaning on them because they have to do this inner work that they haven't done. So it's a long way of saying I learned through failing at being a leader at Yahoo and to some extent at Patreon.
God, this is such a painful lesson to learn. It was, well, I'll speak for myself. It was a hugely painful lesson for me to learn. And the first step was just like even becoming aware that, to your point, it's like you didn't know the details you know now about like who you are, how you were showing up, et cetera, et cetera. And I have a belief that a lot of people, maybe even the majority of people, don't ever have that realization. They just like carry on and they take it to their grave, and that's that. And they don't have to go through the journey of unlearning. And so, which is what for me was even more painful. But in my life, the things that have been the most painful have really also propelled me forward the fastest, or they've had like the biggest impact on me. And so I want to talk about that unlearning process for you. So like, what did that look like? How did you even, was there a framework that you were given? Was it just, did it require more reps? So what did that process look like? You mentioned failure, was there specific failures that were just like so impactful or so painful that you're like, okay, I got to change this?
Yeah, well, I would say I've been fortunate in that I've worked at organizations that have been willing to invest in me. So when I was at Patreon, I had a coach that I was working with because the team I was leading was expanding, the company was expanding, and I knew that I needed help. I had a lot of ideas as to how the organization could run effectively, and I could map that all out and describe all of that. But developing these deep connections with the team, which is necessary to get the buy-in on the change, was something that was difficult for me. And it was clear that that was going on. On the recruiting team in particular, we had teammates who were there when I joined. Some of them had to be turned over, and we're kind of starting from scratch. So I built the recruiting team from the first hire on, given that since and that process of turnover. And so I could tell that I could make it work with folks who I can bring on, but I couldn't make it work with folks who are already there. And so I wanted to be able to connect with and communicate with everyone, not just people who are super analytical and organized and detail oriented in the way that I function, but like who can see the world in different ways and still work well with my particular design and framework. And so I worked with a coach, and with the coach, what we tried to dig down into is what my biggest fear was and how that fear that I had was manifesting in the way that I worked with teams. And later on, I've come to realize how I work with everyone and how I communicate. And it's that I have this fear that people won't think I'm competent. I want people to think that I'm competent, that I'm hardworking, that I'm likable. And I think that the fear that people won't perceive me in that way can lead to a lot of control, like trying to bring a lot of control into the way that I show up. And in that control, you just come out as a robot. You're just like, I've got to say exactly the right thing. I've got to do exactly the right thing. And you're controlling every element of how you show up. And what people get on the other end of that is this uncanny valley robot type experience that's just super technical. There's nothing personal going on there. There's nothing real happening there. And you can't feel anything about that. Like you can't feel connected to that. So that's what was happening.
Yeah, I feel like that's very relatable, and maybe this is just like a common experience. I've definitely felt this way, and yeah, I think something that Stephen, I can't remember how you put this, Stephen, but you were like, once you become aware of something, that's actually a more painful state than before. And it's like a short term, or maybe not short, medium term, painful state that you're in. And so once you had this, I guess, realization that your biggest fear was not being viewed as competent, like, how long was it before it didn't feel so painful and you were comfortable just being Lucia and like showing people
I'm
who you
still
actually
working on
were?
that shit. Like, what are you guys talking about? I am not recovered. I am definitely like, it's a process. It's something that I feel all the time, and I feel more in control of it. So one other thing I didn't share with you all is I have dyslexia. And so growing up, I had a really hard time learning to read. And so I was always in these environments where you have to like read out loud. And I was very concerned, like, oh, people can tell I can't read, like people are going to think that I'm dumb. And so there have been a number of touch points in my life up to this point that have led me to have these concerns and this to be a part of how I show up. And I think the upside of that has been I'm very focused on my work. I take a lot of pride in it, and I'm very serious about doing a good job. The downside of it is that there's so much of my identity that's linked to that competence and that delivery that if there are threats to that, that can
Trigger
make
you?
me what?
Like trigger you?
Yeah, like it can make me think negatively about myself as a person, which you should be able to divide having missed a detail from who you are as a person. Like that's step one of self-esteem. So I would say it's something I work on every day. I continue to be in the process of working on it. I have a coach today who I think is a great coach. I also have a therapist, and I think I'm lucky to be able to have both of those things in my life and to help me through this continual evolution of getting closer to being okay with and happy with myself the way that I am.
Well, first of all, thank you for letting us like sit on this topic for a little while and being vulnerable and sharing this stuff with us. Daniel and I have our own kind of journeys and things that we'll be probably spending a lifetime looking at and focusing on. And so we try to be on throughout the last 4 or 5 years we've been doing this. You would be amazed at how many people have been like, God, thank you for talking about that one thing, that personal thing. And so hopefully our audience is finding some of this useful. But yeah, these are things, it's like the human condition. Like these are going to be things that are with me. And it's more about how I learn to live with these things and be happy with who I am and what the skills that I bring and the skills that, I'm still developing, all of it. And the skills that I'm just never going to have. Right.
Yeah,
And that's
yeah.
okay.
And I think that leadership curve is like, this thing has happened. I'm having a feeling. Why am I having that feeling? Am I feeling like my identity is being drawn into question because of this error? Am I not sure as to what the answer is? What is actually going on here? And then thinking about that before you respond and before you do whatever the next thing is, I think is part of growing as a leader and as a person. So,
ooh, yeah. Plus one of all of that. And so we have a lot of things we want to talk to you about. We may have spent more time than we expected to up front. That's okay. We tell you like, at this point, this is like 40% riff. We have an outline, but we veer off it often. So I do want to spend a little time talking about Virta Health. I don't think, I would imagine most of our listeners aren't familiar with Virta Health. And so in like 30 seconds or less, like what do you do? What's the mission of the company? What's your product or service?
Yeah, our company is all about helping people reverse their diabetes and their obesity. And we do this through personalized dietary change. And we involve usually typically a coach, a doctor, and technology that you're interfacing with, as well as medication in some cases to help you make this change and really take control of your own health and experience this reversal. So that's what we do.
Love it. So it feels like we've been talking about remote work for, since the inception of this podcast. Like it's been a topic that we cover over and over again. And I think both Steven and I had this. Well, to be fair, this wasn't our thought. We were having coffee with Annie Dean, who's the head of Team Anywhere at Atlassian. And we were talking about RTO mandates and how all of these companies want to bring their people back into their office. But at the same time, they're asking their employees to have an AI strategy and to be more efficient and to do things differently, and how those two things contradict each other. And the point that she made was about how if you truly want to, fully lean into AI, then you need as much of the work that you do tracked digitally. So whether it's having meeting recorders. I mean, me and Steven both use Fireflies, or it's communicating on platforms like Slack or email, or having, tracking on like your calendars. Like there's a lot of interesting things you can do when everybody's working remote that you can't do if everybody's in person. And so like that side of the argument for why you should be remote like really speaks to me. And then something else that we talked about quite a bit on the show is you can build community with a fully remote team, but it requires way more work and intention. I've been on
Mm.
teams that were fully remote where I felt like I had like best friends at the company. I felt like I knew almost everybody. I mean, we were only like 100, 120 employees, but like I felt like I could go to almost anybody, ask them a question. And so I know this is something that y'all are tackling at Virta. Can you create this sense of community on a fully remote team? And so tell us a little bit about your journey and how that's going for Virta.
Yeah, we're remote first. And I think one of the things that's special about us is that the way that we deliver care to our members is also more remote, right? So, like, a member interfaces with us through an app. The coach could be anywhere in the United States talking with them, trying to help them through this change. So, we are we're accustomed to this remote communication phenomena and to the idea that measuring someone's success over time through an app is going to be the best way for them to experience a change versus going into a brick and mortar facility once every 6 months and getting an update on how your health is doing. Like, this continuous remote experience is really built into the way that we work in terms of helping members. And so the translation to the way that we work as an organization isn't a far stretch. So we've always had some degree of a remote dynamic as a company because we have coaches and providers who are all over the US so that they can be available for our members. I would say that at Virta, one of the things that I've really valued as we've transitioned from being sort of remote to being fully remote is that everyone is on an equal playing field, because at an earlier period of time, there was more concentration around particular office spaces, and folks who were not in either of those locations, we didn't really see them or hear from them as much. But now that we're all remote, there's, to me, not as much of an emphasis on what team you're on or what level you're at. It's more, here are all the people who are involved in making this thing happen, and we're communicating continuously with one another, which I like and which I think helps for removing bureaucracy and removing like unnecessary power dynamics that can happen in organizations when everyone is in the same place at the same time. Does that make sense?
That does make sense. And so, in the transition from a hybrid or not remote first to fully remote, what have been like the big successes, and what have been like the challenges that you're still working through?
Yeah. I think one of the biggest successes that we have seen is a focus on understanding what people actually want from their work life and the relationships that they have with teammates. So, pretty early on in the process of deciding to make this transition, we had a number of conversations with the team, both through trying to get quantitative data as well as through having focus groups on what do people want their relationship to work to be. And through that process, we realized that there's little to no interest in co-working, which is like being in the same space but doing solitary work. There's a ton of interest in social time or strategic time together. And so from that, we have built our real estate footprint and our calendar of events around the production of this social time or experiences that are meaningful to the team. So some of them are remote and some of them are in person, but they're generally either we're going to try and solve a really hard problem together, or we're going to celebrate something that's meaningful to us, whether it's part of work or independent of work, together in this time and in this place. And making sure that there's a consistent flow of those things across the year really helps to unblock the team on things that they can't come to resolution on through their various async means.
I like that you started with what do people want their relationship to work to be? And it sounds like you had some focus groups. I'm curious, like, what were some of the responses to that question?
Yeah, I mean, most people are looking for their work to help bring meaning to their life, especially people who are in a remote setting. For me, I see my son a lot, and I see the people who I talk to on Zoom a lot. And the rest of my life, I'm alone a lot of the time. And so people are looking for meaning from work in a way that they haven't been previously, because there's an isolation that's associated with not having to make a commute where you see a lot of people, not having to be in an office where you're naturally around a lot of humans. Many of us also, we don't even go to the store anymore. Get that food Instacarted into your house. So you don't really need to leave your home as much. And so a lot of your community, your identity, your sense of meaning is coming from work. And so part of what we heard is, hey, I want to see members more, because seeing members helps me feel that I am part of our mission. I want to spend more time socializing with teammates, because a lot of the communication that we have async is very to the point. It's very much about what we're trying to complete. We don't really get a lot of the water cooler dialogue that we were having in an in-person world. And so I would say meaning and connection are the two things that people were wanting most in terms of what we would develop or deliver.
Some people might argue that what you're describing is, well, at least in a pre-COVID world, is what we would have described as culture. Like that, those are the intangibles, the nebulous things that are hard to really define or pinpoint about the company, because it's not like the job, the actual work I do. It's not like the interpersonal dynamic with my manager, my direct team. It's like all those other things. And I know that's one of the big knocks on remote work is like it doesn't cater to culture building very well. And so I'm curious, like, what do you agree that that's like the culture piece, and what are you doing to kind of create that sense of culture at Virta Health?
I definitely think that culture has a part to play in it. I think about culture as the how you are going to pursue your mission, but the mission's like the what you are pursuing and why you are pursuing it has to be there. And in our remote environment, I mean, one of the things that we do that brings us close to our culture and to our mission is every all hands meeting, which we have, which is every Monday, we talk to a member, and a member talks about the change that they've experienced in their time on Virta. And that's something that is an experience. There are 800 people watching this live conversation between a coach and a member. We're all part of that experience of helping this person in that moment. I feel like there's nothing missing from that. Like if we were in person doing that versus doing that remotely, I don't think it would feel different. And I almost like it better in the remote setting, because we're all having an identical experience of this moment. And we're all able to communicate back too, which I think is really hard in an in-person setting. Because at Yahoo, we used to have all hands, which of course would be global, but I would be there in the room. There was no way to contribute. Like no one, there was no one hearing me if I had anything to say. But in our context, people are chatting. They're getting responses actually from the presenters when we have our all hands. Our members are able to see what we're saying to them, what 800 people have to say to them. And it's really moving and a big point of reinforcing our mission and our culture.
When I was at the last company that I worked for full time, it's a company called Humu, and fully remote or remote first. I think maybe there were like 5-10 people that would go into the office, but the onboarding was probably like the best part of the employee experience. They just like totally nailed it. It was this, I think, 4 to 6 week onboarding program. And it was a combination of like, you got a new buddy who was somebody that's already working there at the company that you were probably going to be working with cross functionally. You had like meetings set up like on your calendar, one with the CEO, one with the head of marketing, with the head of sales. you also had like one-on-one set up with your manager every week for like the next month. Like it was just all just there. And I don't know, I felt like I was a part of the culture by like day 3. We would have like these weekly stand-ups, like 10-minute meetings, and on the Thursday stand-up that new hires started, their new buddy would introduce them. Like, hey, this is Daniel. He has a podcast called The Modern People Leader. He loves to play basketball. He has a dog named Duncan. His wife's name is Tori. He's going to be on this team. And, in the few days that I've worked with him, like he's already done X, Y, and Z. And I've just really enjoyed, working with him. And so that had like such a big impact on me and how I felt like part of that community. And so I know onboarding is something that's also a big focus for you guys. Can you share a little bit about how you're thinking about that?
Yeah, onboarding has been more of focus than usual because our company has grown a lot over the past quarter. So, and that would be Q4. When you think about all the hires we made in the year, 45% of them we made in the last 3 months. So we've been doing a lot of onboarding and a lot of pressure testing of the various parts of onboarding. I would say, all the things that you mentioned at Humu, we do them at Virta. And I think that like having a buddy is definitely critical to getting a relationship in play, especially in a remote environment where there's not really a clear person to talk to. There's no one around you to talk to. I think that that time with the CEO that you mentioned as well is pretty critical. And one of the things that we do at Virta is that a couple of times a month, 2 to 3 times a month, our CEO actually talks to all of our incoming teammates about our origin story, about how our business works, describes our culture, and is open for questions. And so I think it's a great time for all the members of the team who are joining to know one another and kind of feel like they're part of a cohort, and then also to have access to our CEO and kind of hearing it straight from his mouth has been really meaningful for us as we've scaled, and particularly as we've scaled in a remote environment.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I feel like you're basically hearing I feel like the company's story in some ways is the company's strategy. And so hearing it like directly from the CEO, I remember having a very similar experience. Me and the 3 or 4 other new hires on a onboarding call with our CEO, who is kind of like this LinkedIn famous guy. Everybody knows him because he's an author, and you
Mm-hmm.
kind of have like a mini like, oh, like this is like a celebrity kind of moment. And I feel like that you still have that any company with your CEO. Like they are like the person at the company, like they're the face of the company. And so it feels like low hanging fruit. Like I don't know why most companies don't incorporate that into their onboarding. I guess it becomes harder to scale, but
Yeah, I think that's what people say, but I mean, we're nearing 1,000 and Sami still does them. And I think at greater scale, it's more of a demonstration of how important the organization's culture is. And so, when you're a 2,000 person company and your CEO is still taking time to talk to new hires, it really shows something. It really demonstrates something. And I think the other thing that's amazing about it is that it ensures that there's a close link between what the people team is saying the culture is and what the leadership team thinks it is, because you've got the CEO saying that this is what they think and how they see the world. And there's not something that I think often happens as organizations become larger, which is kind of a space of daylight that's starting to exist between your stated culture and the way that the culture is lived in the organization, particularly by leadership, because they're the ones who are setting the standard for how the organization is going to run and what it's really about.
I don't know if HR leaders are catching on or if onboarding processes haven't been examined since post COVID, but this is like I've heard from at least 3 or 4 HR leaders that onboarding is one of their 2025 key priorities. So it will be interesting to see what companies do and see if they'll keep embracing this. But I'm going to switch gears because there are a couple other things we want to talk about. And I can't believe we have like 15, 20 minutes left. So in our catch up, in our prep call, you mentioned HR as a product. And this is like, as soon as you said it, you probably saw me perk up in our meeting, because I was like, "Ooh, yeah, she knows about this." And so we're huge believers in it. And I think in the near future, we will be sharing some news that will make it even clear why
Mhm.
we're so obsessed with this topic. But I'm curious, for you, what is HR as a product? What does it mean to you? Everyone has a kind of a
Yeah,
slightly different view on it. Sometimes people have called it people operations as a product. Some old heads like me still call it agile HR. So, like, to you, what
yeah.
does it mean? And like, how are you adopting some of this at some of these principles?
Yeah, I mean, to me, one thing I would say is I don't conceptualize it as just HR. I think of it as the employee experience, right? So if you think about the products that we know are great in the world, they're looking at all of the parts of the experience of their end user. And so I think of the employee experience in the same way, right? If you say, I want to have a great employee experience, I would say, okay, well, let's look at the pre-hire phase and like the way that you first interface with the candidate, and then the onboarding phase and all the steps that go into that, and then the ongoing employee experience with performance management and engagement and all of that. It's really a life cycle. And what I'm trying to understand is, where are the peaks and valleys in that life cycle, and what can I do about both of them? Like, how can I ratchet up the peaks, and how can I fill those valleys or those pits in that employee experience to produce the best possible product that I'm delivering. And so part of that is why I feel really strongly about IT, HR, total rewards, and events and community all being in the same organization, because they're all touch points of this one unified experience that the employee is having. And those handoffs, like in the minutia of those handoffs, is where those valleys and those peaks can arise.
Ooh, okay, I like this. We had Crystal Boyson on the show recently. She works for a company called Sprout Social, and she walked us through her approach to people ops as a product. And it's very similar to what you're describing. She thinks of it as a life cycle. And I think they moved from centers of excellence to like this life cycle approach where they have teams broken out by the different stages in the life cycle. And
Yep.
so I feel like I heard part of your answer just now, like having IT. I can't remember everybody you said, but if you had to build like a HR team from scratch using the HR as a product approach, like what would be first priority? Like how would you assemble this team? Like if you're rethinking your HR org.
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing you want to do is understand who is your customer or who's your end user. And I think you could say, oh, it's definitely the employee base and it's whatever it is that they want, but I don't think that's actually the case in certain organizations. So I think it's organization by organization. What is this function being produced to do? At least at Virta, we have three mandates. We want to empower excellence, we want to unify and connect the organization, and we want to secure our future. And getting at that, like, our who our customer is and what our customer cares about is the first step. And then after you have clarity on that, you build systems that are self-reinforcing that produce those outcomes. And so with empowering excellence being kind of the first pillar, I think a lot about how to build systems to support top performance across the organization. So part of that's comp, part of that's L&D, part of that is efficiency gains, and going from there. So I wouldn't do it by team. I would actually do it by the type of change that is of greatest importance to the organization and the systems that are necessary to bring about that change.
Love it. You, if you were to drilling down even more specifically into the question, if you had it was, you're a 200, 300 employee company, so smaller scale, and you were looking to build a new team, like what would be the first hire you make? It's you and one or two others. What is the skill set that you're looking for? Having done this work already, I'm just curious, because I know that the
Yeah,
skill set is important, and there are a lot of HR
yeah.
teams that probably don't have the right skills and experiences within their teams. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. But what do you look for? What are the most important kind of traits and characteristics of your team members?
Yeah, I mean, okay, so you asked a couple different questions. You asked about, at a certain scale, what are the common problems? And then you asked what types of traits I look for in my teammates.
Yes.
Okay, so I mean, my thought is at 200 or 300, hopefully there's some core infrastructure. You've got like your leveling, your role, you've got your HRIS in place, but it depends on the company. I've advised for companies that are past 300 that don't have either of those things. And they're like, this is the spreadsheet where I've got the names of my employees. Can you help me figure out what to do next? So my thought is hopefully they've done that basic tooling. And if that tooling is in place, then I'd probably be interested in getting a strong business partner to help support me in understanding the core issues across the functions. But again, if they don't have that core tooling, then I might be looking for someone in TR to produce that infrastructure that's necessary. So it would
Interesting. And
be,
I'm
yeah.
curious, when you say the core tooling, the first thing you mention is leveling. And I
Yeah.
agree. I agree. We spent a lot of time in the comp space lately, and I am now of the belief that job architecture is like the one of the most, if not the most important foundational thing you need to have set up in your HR organization. I'm
Mhm.
curious that was the first thing you said.
For
So
sure.
why is
For sure.
leveling the top of the list for you?
Yeah, like if you want to drive performance, right, you've got compensation as a lever for that, and you've got career progression as another lever for that. But if you have no roles and levels, then it's going to be hard to do either of those things. So I think that this whole conversation about driving performance and linking what the people team does to company outcomes is going to be difficult without some kind of architecture in place. So that's part of what I was trying to allude to. And I was like, my hope is that 200 to 300, you've already got that stuff in place, and you've got a functioning org that is paying people appropriately and that has the right data and governance in place. If you don't have that, though, then I'd probably start with that. But if you have that, then I'd be interested in a business partner who can help understand the strategic challenges and then evaluate the nuance that's within that architecture so such that it is optimized for the organization. And then you had a second question that was about like, what do I hire for? Is that?
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
no, I think you nailed it. If you don't have leveling, you need someone to help with getting that kind of foundational, some of those core
Mhm.
foundational pieces in place. And if you do have it in place, and it's an HRBP, because then you can start looking at, I think you referred to it as the peaks and valleys of that experience, and where start
Mhm.
prioritizing those while you're also blocking and tackling and handling employee issues and partnering with the business, et cetera, et cetera. So
For
I
sure.
think you nailed it all.
And so on the leveling piece and having some of those foundations in place, this is something that I know almost nothing about. And so I'm curious, like, how, when do you know that like what you've built, like you're not paying people the right amount, like you don't have any of this stuff it feels like it's not right. How do you know that it's not right? Is that from
Yeah.
like survey data? Like, where do you
Well,
start?
all these systems are interconnected, right? So if you have total rewards, you're going to be getting feedback from the market. Not total rewards, I'm sorry, talent acquisition. You're going to be getting feedback from the market, which is like people are not accepting offers that you are making with this job title, this expectation set, and this compensation. So you'll know pretty quickly people are not coming in doing this job at this level with this pay. So you've got that external validation. And then internally with 200 to 300 people, those people are going to be talking to one another. And so one of the things that happens in early stage organizations around this size is people are coming to you saying, well, Johnny is a director and he has much less scope than me. Like, why am I only a manager and XYZ? So like the organization is telling you that there's something either missing there or something that's not been communicated clearly. And so when I mentioned the BP, like the BP can take this spreadsheet, nuts and bolts, these are the levels and the roles, and translate that into a communication strategy for the organization such that people understand what's the difference between a director, and is there a difference between a director in organization A versus a director in organizational B, and why is what you've produced still fair and right? Like, they can help you navigate communicating all of those things once those elements are in place and there's a logic to your policies and processes.
Well, I think we're at that point in time. I have a lot of questions, and this is something that we could spend a whole hour talking about, but we have a couple more traditions, and the next one is what we call rapid fire questions. It's the same set of questions we ask every guest. You ready to do this?
Okay.
All right. I'll take that as a yes. The first question is, what's one piece of advice you'd give someone starting in HR today?
Go to an organization that fits with what you believe in, that fits with your mission and your values. And if you're in a place that doesn't, just leave, go somewhere else. There's a lot of jobs out there, what I would say.
It's great advice. If your team gave you a superpower nickname, what would it be?
Probably something about being calm under pressure. They gave me like a team award last year that was basically like that. I don't know. Calm under pressure.
That is a superpower.
I'm trying to think of like some sort of like ice cold. I don't know, like
ice cold.
There has to be something there that's easy.
I think theirs had something to do with a diamond, like making a diamond under pressure, but I don't know. Like, I don't remember what it was exactly at this point.
I like it. Okay, next question. If you could steal one strategy from another company, what would it be?
I really like Warby Parker's. They have this program where you can go and work in the physical offices if you're part of the corporate organization. And I think that connection to the member or the customer experience is very important. So I've been thinking about how do we create an even closer bond between our members and our Virta employees, because I think it's just so critical to that sense of meaning that I was talking about.
I didn't know that Warby Parker did that. That's super interesting. All right, last rapid fire question. Who do we need to have on the show next?
I don't know. I'm at a loss. I'm not sure. You guys have had so many great people. Like, you really have. I would say like, oh, Brene Brown, but you've already had Brene Brown. Like, so
fair enough.
You've had a lot of my heroes already.
Fair enough. It is getting harder and harder because we've had people come on. They're like, what about so-and-so? And it's like, no, we've had them on. What about so-and-so? No, we've also had them on. Well, that leaves us at one final tradition ritual. We call it one word or phrase close. We all respond with a word or few words, just as we reflect on the last hour and change we've spent together, a way of summing things up. And again, we prefer for our guests to go first. So
Meaning.
Nice. Daniel, you want to go next?
Yeah.
I'll go next.
Unlearn. Unlearn.
Man,
Yeah.
always do that.
Did I steal what you were going to say?
Yeah, and I had a sense. So I was going to go in. I'm going to go with awaken. Going back to the beginning.
Okay.
Awaken, yeah.
All right, Stefan.
The opposite of sleepwalking. Well, this has been amazing. So thank you so much for joining us. You're part of our community now, so hopefully you'd be open to doing this again sometime.
For sure.
It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us. Okay.
Thank you, Lucia. Have a good rest of your week.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of The Modern People Leader. We really, really appreciate it. And if you enjoyed the show, please leave us a 5-star rating. It would mean the world to us. And connect with us on LinkedIn. We want to know what you think about the show, and you can find links to both of our profiles in the show notes. Thanks again for listening, and see you on the next episode.